Megan Stevens from Eat Beautiful, and I'm ready to show you how to make Lazy Man's custard. I've named it this because I created it one morning when I wanted a traditional, thick British custard, but I didn't want to spend a long time making it. Also because I'm grain-free, I couldn't use flour to thicken it. And additionally, sometimes I want dessert. I want something to taste like dessert, but I want it to have a lot of protein and be highly nutritious for me. So I created this custard. It meets all of those qualifications. The cool thing about this custard is it is really high in protein. It's as good as having a couple eggs on a plate. In fact, it does have 2 whole eggs in the recipe. So without further ado, let's get started making Lazy Man's custard. I have here in the little copper pot a ½ cup of grass-fed cream. Over it, I'm going to sprinkle 1 tablespoon of sustainably sourced gelatin. There's a small amount of flaxseed meal in there from that little bowl, so just ignore that. Ordinarily, when you sprinkle gelatin over the surface of a liquid, it will just bloom on its own. It will simply dissolve into the liquid. But because grass-fed cream is so thick, I have a whisk here to help me with that. So I'm whisking in the 1 tablespoon gelatin to the ½ cup grass-fed cream. Now it's not going to mix in perfectly. As you can see, it's a little bit lumpy, and that's okay. So now I'm going to turn on the heat to medium-high, and I'm going to continue to whisk the heavy cream while it heats and helps to melt the gelatin. Now this is a very high ratio of gelatin to the liquid, and the reason for that is because I was lazy the morning I created this recipe. I wanted it to gel quickly. I wanted it to not have to be super cold. Also, I wanted it to gel when it was warm or room temperature. If you put in a smaller ratio of gelatin, you're going to have to completely chill your liquid. So without any flour, I'm actually thickening this gelatin with this custard with just gelatin. No tapioca starch, no arrowroot, and no flour. Now I'm turning the heat down to medium, and I'm going to continue to whisk this while the gelatin dissolves. You can see it's starting to get quite hot. You might be able to see the steam coming off the top of it. I'm just going to go a little bit longer until I see the gelatin has melted even more fully. We do not need the cream to come to a simmer. We just simply want to melt the gelatin. I'm going to move it off the heat now for a minute since I don't need the cream to simmer. I just want the gelatin to melt. Okay, at this point I'm going to turn the heat to low, and what we're going to do is pretty amazing actually. We're going to add whole eggs. Now ordinarily you wouldn't want to add whole eggs to a custard because the whites would curdle, not to mention the yolks could curdle as well. Maybe you would use a double boiler to protect that from happening, but custards don't usually have egg whites at all. However, I found that by using heavy cream, and you can also substitute, by the way, coconut cream, I found that by using the heavy cream and the gelatin, it protects the eggs from curdling. You have a little more grace period. So the gelatin has totally melted. I'm going to actually pour in 1 egg. I'm going to wait and not do both at the same time, and that allows me to stir this in really fast. So this is when you get to access your muscle power, and you're going to whisk this in really quickly, again, to prevent the curdling from happening. So you have to be kind of rigorous about this. Okay, we've got the first one whisked in, and we're going to move it off the heat and drop in the second egg. Great. Now the reason we're being careful to heat up the eggs, even though we don't want them to curdle, is because egg white is very hard for the body to digest when it's raw. However, egg yolk is quite nutritious raw. So what we're doing right now is cooking the egg white without letting it curdle. So I want it to get as hot as possible without it curdling, which is why I'm whisking it so rapidly. Just a little bit longer. I want there to be steam in there. I want to know that it's very hot, but I don't want it to simmer, because if it simmers, then we're going to get curdling. You can even put your finger in to touch it and test the temperature. Like I said, you want it very hot without simmering. So I can see the steam coming off. I'm going to turn the heat off and continue to whisk it just for another minute to make sure all the egg white is thoroughly whisked in and heated through. Now at this point in the custard's process, it can go one of two ways. Usually I make the custard sweet, but you can also use this as a cream base for like a Mornay or a bechamel sauce and use it as a savory base. So I'm going to turn off the camera and then turn it back on again and show you both of these options. Have you ever made zoodles? Zoodles are noodles made from zucchini. So I have used a spiralizer and made noodles out of the raw zucchini, and I'm guessing many of you have tried this, but if you haven't, they're absolutely wonderful. They're very satisfying, more so I think than traditional pasta. So I'm actually overcrowding the pan a little bit here, but what we're going to do is cook them over medium-high heat. I'm going to sprinkle on a little bit of pink sea salt, and we're going to just saute these greens because I'm going to use them, or this green veggie rather, I'm going to use them as the base for the savory, creamy, custardy cheese sauce that I'm going to pour over the top of them. The zoodles are complete after about 3 to 5 minutes when they're very flexible. You don't want to overcook them because you want them to stay noodles. You don't want them to break. But about like this looks great. You can put the lid on to create steam as you saute them. Zoodles can also be steamed or blanched in bone broth. There's several ways to create them. So these are done, and in a few minutes we'll pour the cheesy sauce over the top. Now that our custard is complete, we have one of two options. I must admit that most of the time I choose the sweet option. This custard is pretty much ready to go other than being sweetened. You have a couple choices. I usually personally do stevia. I usually use New Naturals brand, but right now I have this one by Omika Organics, which is quite good as well. My kids usually use the liquid stevia. So you just sweeten it to taste. You know, add a little bit, taste it, and add a little more if you need it. That's my favorite way to have this breakfast because then it's really high in protein, it's high in fat, and there are really no sugars involved at all. So it tastes sweet, but it's completely savory in terms of its nutrition. You can also add butter if you love, you know, that extra fat. You can also add some raw milk or some extra coconut milk or a homemade nut milk. Like I said, there's a really high ratio of gelatin to the cream, so there's not very much liquid, so it will set up really fast. So if you find that it's setting up, you can add a little bit more liquid, or if you want to dilute it, you can add more liquid as well. So the raw milk is a nice option, and I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a second. I'm going to show you the versatility of this basic recipe, because there's basically 4 other recipes that can spin off of it that are each very, very simple. So first of all, let's just assume that you're going to have some really nice custard. Can you see how thick it is? It's really nice. There's no curdling at all. So one option is simply to take some custard, sprinkle it with cinnamon, or put a little vanilla in if you want to, add some stevia or honey, obviously, or pure maple syrup, and then stir it in. You can have it with any kind of a grain-free baked good. I love actually pouring this over waffles or pancakes, putting the pancakes or waffles in a bowl, and then pouring this thick custard over the top. Lovely. So that's one option, is just to sweeten it, and it's ready to serve. Another option is, let's skip to this one. If you chill it, this one is one I did ahead of time a few hours ago. If you put it in the fridge, it will chill up more quickly than most gelatins because of the ratio of gelatin to cream. You can chill it, and it's going to become very, very thick. I want you to see just how thick this is because of the ratio. So at that point, you can run hot water on the outside and unmold it. My favorite thing to do when it's like this is actually to pour hot milk over the top and eat it like porridge. I'm one of those kids that grew up with a mom who made oatmeal really thick, and so there were big chunks of it, and then we'd pour milk and brown sugar over the top. I liked that. I don't like runny oatmeal. I like the thick oatmeal. So this actually has the same effect as porridge. If you pour hot milk over the top, or warm milk, and then break up these chunks into pieces, you actually get bites that mimic the chunks of oatmeal. So that's the other option, is to break this up like that, maybe in a bigger bowl, and pour hot milk over the top. And this is already sweetened with stevia. And then you could garnish it with berries, sprouted nuts, hemp seeds, whatever you like to put on your porridge, then you could put on the top of it. And that's actually one of the ways I eat it most frequently. So that's option number 2. Option number 3 is to use frozen berries. This is the option that my daughter does the most often, which is to pour the hot custard that's fresh after it's sweetened directly over the frozen berries. And what happens, of course, is that the frozen berries help the gelatin to set up almost immediately. And then, you know, it can set up pretty thickly if you want, so you can add a bit of milk if you prefer. But the frozen berries make it an instant thick gelatin creamy treat. All right, now let's talk about the savory option. So I have here some raw cave-aged blue cheese, and I also have here some raw Gruyere, which is pretty much the classic British macaroni and cheese of choice. It's lovely. They're both lovely. I'm going to add them to my custard that is not sweetened. This is my sweetened custard over there. This custard here is not sweetened. And so basically, instead of a custard, I'm going to now think of it as a Mornay cheese sauce. And it's basically like a bechamel base. Bechamel is just a cream sauce thickened with flour. And ours doesn't need to be thickened with flour because it's thickened with gelatin. So now I'm going to add this lovely fat, this lovely cheese to my creamy base, and stir it in to melt. It's absolutely gorgeous. Oh my goodness. Okay, and then you can take this, and of course I've got my zoodles here. A very hot pan of zucchini noodles. There's steam coming up off the top of these, and you can pour your cheese sauce over the zoodles. Oh my goodness. This is gorgeous. And then I would recommend topping that with some broken pieces of prosciutto, and you'll have an incredibly rich, delicious dinner. And this could serve 2, 3, 4 people, smaller servings, or 2 people, bigger servings. So there are the zoodles with the creamy, cheesy sauce that, remember, has 2 whole eggs in it. So it's fortified with a ton of protein, and it's also high in fat, which is great for helping minerals and nutrients to absorb properly in your body. So thanks so much for joining me for Lazy Man's Custard, a very versatile and fun recipe. I'm Megan Stevens from Eat Beautiful.